Fat girl, accidentally married, mountain man, in drunken mistake. Now, he won't let her. Annul it rain, hammered Goldstone like a punishment, drumming so loud on the boardwalks that it swallowed the town's gossip. Inside the silver dollar, Ophelia Fee Carmichael clutched a glass she didn't remember ordering and whispered to the wood-grain bar, "By sunrise, I belong to Mortimer Grimsby." Her voice broke on the name. 60, spiteful, and rich enough to buy a ruined family's pride with a signature. That was the future her father had bartered for. "Another," she told the barkeep, though the room already swayed. She had never been drunk before. Tonight, she wanted to forget the auction of her life. A shadow eased onto the stool beside her. Caleb Bear Mackenzie, Thunder Peak hermit miner hunter, filled the space like a storm cloud in a doorway. He smelled of wet pine and gun oil, of nights spent too long alone. He raised his whiskey in a mute salute that was almost tender. "You look like a woman standing in front of a freight train," he said, voice rough as gravel. "And you," Fee answered, blinking through tears, "look like a man who let one hit him on purpose." They laughed, two broken sounds that recognized each other. The words spilled out: her father's debts, Grimsby's proposal, the house to be seized at dawn. Caleb answered in low pieces of his own. 5 years since a fire took everything he loved. 5 years of silence on Thunder Peak. Somewhere between the third and fourth drink, fear loosened its grip and a wild idea took its place. "What if we married first?" Fee blurted, half daring, half drowning. "Then Grimsby can't have me." Caleb's eyes, winter dark, steadied. "Then you won't be alone, neither will I." They staggered through black rain to Judge Murphy's porch, the old man blinking blearily in his nightshirt, palm open for the fee. Vows were slurred, names mispronounced, thunder rolling like an organ in a chapel. "I now pronounce," Murphy hiccuped, stamped the paper, and shoved 2 rings across. The gavel of the storm crashed. Fee stared at the plain band on her finger and heard the impossible sentence, "wife." Ophelia Carmichael had been raised to believe in manners, lace gloves, and the delicate veneer of a merchant's daughter. Yet at 26, she was branded by whispers. Too soft, too plump, too spoiled by books instead of beaux. When her father's fortune collapsed under debts, she became something worse, currency to be traded. Mortimer Grimsby, the town's wealthiest widower, had offered salvation in the form of shackles, and her father, hollow-eyed, trembling, had accepted. By dawn, Fee would have been led down an aisle she did not choose. She hadn't run to the silver dollar to find courage. She had run because despair was heavier than the rain. Her dress clung damp to her curves, bonnet sagging, hair limp with storm water. When she stumbled through the swinging doors, the laughter of cowhands and the sharp perfume of card sharps broke for only a moment, long enough for everyone to take in the sight of a merchant's daughter unraveling. "Carmichael's girl," one man muttered, lips curling, "already drunk before midnight." Another chuckled. "Guess Grimsby's buying himself damaged goods." The sting of humiliation lit her cheeks. But then Caleb Mackenzie, massive and silent at the end of the bar, shifted in his seat. He was not laughing. He simply watched, eyes gray as ash after a storm. Caleb was legend in Goldstone, the hermit of Thunder Peak, the bear of the mountain. Children whispered about his cabin above the tree line, his strength, his grief. 5 years earlier, fire had gutted his homestead and claimed his young family. Since then, he came down rarely, selling ore and furs, drinking alone until his silence made others uncomfortable. Tonight, fate had steered him into Fee's path. Their conversation in the haze of whiskey was clumsy, confessional, raw. Fee confessed her dread of Grimsby. Caleb confessed his emptiness. Two strangers, bound by the same taste of loss, found themselves daring what neither would have sober, a marriage no one expected. And so Judge Murphy, reeking of gin and half asleep, scratched their names onto paper and declared them husband and wife. When dawn broke, the drunken haze peeled away. Fee awoke in a strange cabin high in the pines, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled of smoke and cedar. She blinked into pale sunlight and saw a crude gold band glinting on her finger. Horror surged. Across the room, Caleb stirred, his bulk shifting on a wooden chair where he had slept upright with a rifle across his knees. His hair was mussed, his shirt open at the throat, but his gaze, steady and far too sober now, landed on her like a brand. "You're awake," he said simply. "This isn't real," she whispered, clutching her hand to her chest. "It was a mistake. We need to annul it." Caleb's jaw tightened, but there was no mockery in his face, only quiet resolve. "I don't want an annulment." Fee's breath caught. "You can't be serious. We don't know each other. I can't—" "You can," he said, "and you will, at least for now. You needed saving last night. Maybe I did too. Give it a month. If you still want out, I'll let you go. But don't call what happened a mistake. It may be the truest thing I've done in years." And there, in the fragile light of morning, Ophelia Carmichael realized she was bound, by law, by vow, by circumstance, to a man the town called a beast, but whose eyes saw her without judgment. The first day on Thunder Peak felt like exile. Fee had never left the comfort of town life. Now every step sank into mud or caught on roots, her skirts soaked, her shoes ruined. The rain had stopped, but the mountain held its own damp chill, mist coiling through the pines like restless spirits. "Keep close," Caleb said, his stride sure as a man who had walked this path in his sleep 100 times. He carried both their packs on his broad shoulders as though they weighed nothing. "I didn't agree to a hike through purgatory," Fee muttered, clutching her skirts. His glance flicked back, unreadable. "It's the way home." Home. The word stabbed her with dread. She hadn't chosen this place or this man. Yet each time she stumbled, Caleb's arm steadied her without reproach. He offered no soft words, only the quiet assurance of strength. It unsettled her more than mockery ever had. By dusk, they reached a clearing where the trees opened to reveal the mountain's shoulder. A cabin squatted against the slope, smoke curling faint from its chimney. It was rough-hewn, patched with stone and logs, yet somehow it looked steadfast, as though it had endured more storms than any man. Inside, the air smelled of pine resin and ashes. Caleb lit a lantern, its glow spilling across the single room. A stone hearth, a rough table, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs. 2 beds, one narrow cot, one wider frame covered in furs. Fee's heart stuttered. "You'll take the bed," Caleb said. "I'll use the cot." She blinked. "You built this?" His shrug was almost shy. What was left after the fire? The hours that followed stretched long. Caleb worked methodically, chopping wood, stirring a pot of venison stew, mending a trap. Fee, unused to idleness, hovered uselessly until he handed her a knife and a sack of potatoes. "Cut," he said, and when she obeyed, her trembling eased. That night, as rain whispered against the roof, she lay beneath a quilt stitched by hands long gone. The warmth of stew lingered in her belly. From across the room, Caleb's low hum drifted, half song, half memory. She closed her eyes, clutching the quilt tighter. Days turned into a rhythm of travel and work. Caleb showed her the forest paths, where mint and sage grew wild, how to spot deer tracks, how to tell safe berries from poison. He spoke sparingly, but each lesson was offered with patience. When she faltered, he steadied her. When she cursed the climb, he only chuckled low in his chest. One evening, while gathering firewood, Fee caught her reflection in a pool. Mud streaked her cheeks, curls tangled wild, her figure plain as ever. She turned away in disgust, only to find Caleb watching. "What?" she snapped. His voice was calm. "You look alive." The words unsettled her more than any insult. No one had ever said that to her, not her father, not the town suitors who mocked behind fans, not even herself. Later, huddled before the fire with a blanket, she risked a question. "Why won't you let me annul it? Why keep me here?" Caleb's eyes glinted in the firelight, shadows deepening his scars. "Because for the first time in years, I don't feel empty." You filled the silence, Ophelia. Maybe you don't believe it now, but last night wasn't just drunken folly. It was the start of something neither of us expected. Her breath caught, torn between fear and something warmer, dangerous hope. She turned away, pretending to busy herself with the kettle, but her heart beat loud in her chest, and she knew the mountain had already begun its slow work, stripping away what the town had told her she was, leaving only the woman she might become. Morning on Thunder Peak began not with bells or church chimes, but with the cry of ravens and the crackle of firewood. Fee woke to the scent of smoke and the sight of Caleb crouched before the hearth, coaxing flame from embers with practiced hands. His hair hung loose, his shirt open at the collar, steam rising from the pot where he stirred oats. She sat up quickly, clutching the quilt around herself. "You could have woken me." His glance over his shoulder was calm. "Didn't want to. You looked like you needed rest." No one had ever spoken those words to her without judgment. Rest was always something she had to earn, to justify, to apologize for. Here, it was simply given. That morning set a pattern. Caleb worked in the woods, checking traps, hauling timber, mining rock from the stream beds, while Fee managed the cabin. At first she fumbled, burning bread, scattering ash while sweeping, dropping jars from shelves. But Caleb never scolded. When she wrung her hands, embarrassed, he only said, "Takes practice. Everything does." By the second week, she discovered joy in the rhythm, kneading dough while rain tapped the roof, patching quilts by lamplight, humming songs her mother had once taught her. When Caleb returned, his boots caked in mud, he always paused at the doorway, breathing deep as though the scent of her cooking was more welcome than the fire's warmth. One evening, after a long day, Caleb set down his axe and asked quietly, "You want to learn?" She frowned. "Learn what?" He pointed to the woodpile. "Splitting logs." Her laugh was sharp. "I'd look ridiculous." "You'll look strong," he answered. So he placed the axe in her hands, standing close enough that she felt the heat of his body behind her. He guided her grip, adjusted her stance, and stepped back. The first swing clattered off the log, nearly toppling her, but he only nodded. Again. By the third attempt, the wood split clean. She gasped, startled by the sharp crack, and his mouth curved into a rare smile. "Told you." Something loosened in her chest at that smile. She found herself laughing with him, laughing in a way she hadn't in years. As days stretched into nights, their companionship grew layered with small, tender rituals. Caleb always let her eat first, serving stew into her bowl before his own. When storms battered the cabin, he checked the shutters twice, then sat by her side with a quiet assurance, "It'll hold." Sometimes he recited poems half-remembered from his wife, and sometimes he simply listened to Fee's voice as she sang, eyes closed as though her song eased something carved hollow in him. One night, she caught him mending the roof by lantern light after she had gone to bed. "You should have waited till morning," she chided, pulling her shawl tight as she stepped outside. He shook his head, hammer in hand. "Didn't want rain leaking where you sleep?" Her throat tightened. No man had ever thought of her comfort before his own. It was in these moments that Fee's reflection began to change. She no longer saw only the roundness of her face or the weight of her hips. She saw capable hands that stitched, baked, and tended. She saw a woman who could split logs, gather herbs, survive storms. She saw herself through Caleb's eyes, and those eyes never once flickered with pity. But fear lingered too. Each time she caught herself softening toward him, she reminded herself, this was never meant to last. He had bargained for a month. At its end, she could walk away. Still, one evening when they sat by the fire, her mending in her lap and his pipe unlit in his hands, the silence between them felt different, thick with unspoken words. Caleb finally broke it, his voice low. "You know, you don't have to apologize for existing here." She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "You shrink, like you're afraid to take space. But this cabin is as much yours now as mine. Stop trying to disappear." Tears pricked her eyes. She opened her mouth to argue, but instead she whispered, "I don't know how." Caleb set aside his pipe, leaned forward, and said, "Then let me show you." And for the first time, Ophelia Carmichael allowed herself to wonder if this accident of a marriage was not a chain, but a key, unlocking a life she'd been told she didn't deserve. For weeks, the mountain wrapped them in a cocoon of quiet routines, firelight suppers, steady work, soft laughter, breaking the silence that once haunted the cabin. But happiness in the wilderness was never meant to last unchallenged. The first sign came in the form of hoof prints on the lower trail. Caleb found them one morning while checking his traps. 3 horses, shod and ridden hard, cutting across his land where no rider should be. He crouched, fingers tracing the impressions. His mouth tightened. When he returned, Fee noticed the change in him, the way he watched the tree line, the rifle he kept closer at hand. "What is it?" she asked. "Trouble sniffing around," he said shortly. She pressed, but he offered no more. It was his habit to shoulder danger alone, as though silence could shield her. Yet Fee's heart twisted with unease. That unease sharpened when a letter arrived, carried not by post, but slipped beneath the cabin door while they slept. Fee found it at dawn, the paper damp with dew. The handwriting was her father's. "Ophelia," it read, "you belong to Mortimer Grimsby by contract. That farce of a marriage means nothing. Return, and all can yet be mended. Refuse, and consequences will fall not only on you, but on the man who shelters you." Her fingers shook as she read. For months she had tried not to hate her father, to believe his debts had forced his hand. But this was betrayal laid bare. He had sold her future, and now he sought to sell her safety too. She hid the letter at first, fearful of Caleb's reaction. But secrets weighed heavy, and that evening by the fire she laid it in his lap. Caleb read it once, twice, jaw set like stone. Then he tossed it into the flames. "You're not going back," he said flatly. "You don't understand," Fee whispered. "Grimsby has money, power. If the marriage is challenged, if the judge says it's invalid, let him try." His eyes were fierce. "Paper doesn't make you his. Vows spoken in the rain make you mine." The heat of his certainty both steadied and frightened her. What if he was wrong? What if the law, the town, the world itself conspired to drag her back? Whispers followed them when they ventured into Goldstone for supplies. Women leaned together at the dry goods counter. Men smirked as she passed. "Mountain wife," someone muttered, "playing house with a bear." The sting of ridicule clawed at her old insecurities. That night, alone by the fire, she asked Caleb the question that gnawed at her soul. Do you only keep me here out of pity? Because you think no one else would?" He turned on her so sharply she flinched. "Don't you ever say that." His voice was raw, stripped of gentleness. "You think I'd risk everything, my land, my life, for pity? I keep you because I want you, because you matter." Silence stretched, filled only by the pop of sap in the logs. Tears slid hot down her cheeks. For the first time, she began to believe him. But Grimsby was not finished. He marched into the county courthouse with her father at his side, claiming the marriage was void. Drunken vows before a half-soused judge, he argued, could not stand against a lawful contract. He demanded custody of his bride and rights to the Thunder Peak claim that Caleb worked. Word of the hearing reached the mountain. Fee sat rigid at the table while Caleb paced, fury in every line of him. "They want both of us," he muttered. "You for property, me for the gold under this soil." The cocoon of the cabin felt suddenly fragile. The outside world, with its greed and cruelty, was pressing in, ready to shatter the fragile love they had only just begun to name. The night was too still. Even the pines seemed to hold their breath. Caleb felt it in his bones, the hush that came before violence. He loaded his rifle, movement steady, and glanced at Fee. She stood by the hearth, pale but unflinching, the shotgun he'd taught her to use clutched in both hands. Hooves thundered up the slope. Lanterns bobbed between the trees, a dozen shadows breaking into the clearing. At their head rode Mortimer Grimsby, cloaked in black, his silver beard gleaming in the firelight. Beside him, Fee's father slouched in the saddle, face pinched with shame and fear. "Ophelia!" Grimsby's voice boomed. "Come out now. This farce is over. The law is on my side. The gold is mine. And you," his lips curled in a sneer, "you are mine as well." Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle leveled. "She doesn't belong to you. She never will." A ripple of laughter rose from the hired guns. Grimsby raised a hand. "Kill him! Bring her to me alive!" The first shot cracked through the night. Caleb dove behind a post as bullets shredded the porch rail. Splinters bit into his cheek. He returned fire, dropping one of the riders. Chaos erupted, horses screaming, men shouting, gunpowder choking the air. Inside, Fee's hands shook, but she remembered Caleb's lessons. Breathe, aim, squeeze. She fired through the open window, her shot catching a man in the shoulder and toppling him from his horse. Shock coursed through her, but so did a fierce exhilaration. She wasn't helpless anymore. "Good girl!" Caleb shouted between volleys, pride rough in his voice. The battle surged closer. Flames from a lantern set the barn ablaze, sending sparks whirling into the night sky. Fee coughed in the smoke, but stood her ground. When two men broke through the door, she fired again, the blast echoing like thunder. At last, Grimsby himself staggered into the yard, pistol in hand. His shot grazed Caleb's arm, spinning him back. With a roar, Caleb charged, tackling the old man into the dirt. They wrestled, fists and fury, until Caleb ripped the gun away and leveled it at his enemy. "Do it!" Grimsby spat, blood on his lips. "Prove you're nothing but a beast." Caleb's chest heaved. For a moment, rage urged him to pull the trigger. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder. Fee's hand, small but steady. "Don't," she whispered. "You've already won. Don't let him take your soul." Caleb's gaze softened. He tossed the pistol aside and hauled Grimsby to his feet, shoving him toward the sheriff's men who had just thundered up the trail, drawn by the gunfire and flames. As Grimsby was dragged away, Fee collapsed against Caleb, sobbing with relief. He wrapped her in his arms, burying his face in her hair. "You fought beside me," he murmured. "You're braver than you know." "And you," she whispered back, "are the only man I'll ever choose." The cabin smoldered, but it still stood. So did they, together against the world. Dawn spilled gold across Thunder Peak, painting the wreckage in soft light. Smoke still curled from the barn's blackened beams, the scent of ash heavy in the air. Yet, inside the cabin, the fire still burned bright, casting a warm glow across two figures huddled close. Fee sat wrapped in a quilt, hair tangled, cheeks streaked with soot. Caleb moved about quietly, his wounded arm bound but steady as he set a pot of coffee to boil. The ordinary gesture, the clink of tin mugs, the hiss of water, felt like a miracle after the night's chaos. She watched him, heart swelling. "We should be terrified," she whispered. He glanced up, a faint smile curving his lips. "Maybe, but all I feel is peace." Her throat tightened. She thought of the girl she had been, frightened, insecure, shackled by shame. That girl had stumbled into a drunken mistake. Yet here she was, reborn by fire and courage, sitting across from a man who saw her not as a burden, but as a partner. Caleb carried the mugs over, setting one before her. Then he knelt, his broad frame filling the quiet space. "This is your home now," he said softly, "if you'll have it, if you'll have me." Tears blurred her vision. She reached for his hand, fingers threading through his. "I already do." Outside, the forest whispered with new life. Inside, the cabin glowed with warmth, a sanctuary against a world that had tried and failed to tear them apart. And though danger might return, though society might scorn, one truth remained. Their love had been forged in fire, and no storm could ever unmake it. Stories like Fee and Caleb's remind us that love often comes from the most unexpected places, even from mistakes we once thought would ruin us. What others call foolish can sometimes be the very thing that saves our hearts. Every time you share your thoughts, it reminds me that stories connect us across miles and lives. So tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Do you believe a love this strong still exists in our world? If you do, don't go anywhere. The next story might just be written for you.